Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Ins and Outs of Work.
I'm Joe, aka the HR Outsider.
And I'm Nelly, the HR Insider. And in today's episode, we talk about remote onboarding, what it is and the purpose it serves, a surprising did you know section, and the Outsider Outpouring, followed by the debunking of 2 onboarding myths.
Yes, and there's going to be a lot of information in this episode as always, so if you'd like to read up on any of the points we make today, check out the show notes wherever you're listening to this podcast for all the links. Before we do dive in though, as you will always know, we'd like to mention this. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, share the episode with a friend, and leave a review.
And so here we are again, Joe, for another episode of the Ins and Outs of Work. And today is going to be all about onboarding.
Yes, and remote onboarding here in this world of 2021.
Yeah, let's get to the definition because we've got a nice one here, Joe. Employee onboarding is like the workplace honeymoon period. It's the time when you, as an organization, start your loving, lasting relationship with your beloved spouse, your new employee. As such, the onboarding period is where the foundation of the employer-employee relationship is being built.
I love that image of the honeymoon. Beautiful, Neely. The purpose of an onboarding period is twofold. So on the one hand, and this is the sort of traditional goal of employer onboarding, it's meant to get new hires operational as quickly as possible. But on the other hand, and more of a recent role of onboarding, it's used to actually shape the critical first impressions that new employees might have of a company as well.
Yes, so there's definitely 2 elements here, Joe. On the one hand, there's this operational part of the onboarding process, and on the other hand, there's the first impressions and also the socialization part of new hires.
And the culture and getting them to understand that.
Absolutely, and that is a really nice transition, Joe, to our Did You Know section. Did you know that J. van Manen and E.H. Shine in 1979 were some of the very first to research and understand what they called organizational socialization, there it is, which was essentially the process by which people learn the ropes of a particular organizational role.
I did not know that, Neely. Thank you for telling me.
You're welcome. And some of the earliest recorded so-called onboarding methods were just that. Take this, do this, and good luck. Now, North America's first transcontinental railroad was a 1,900-mile continuous railroad line constructed between 1863 and 1869 that connected the East to the West.
So we're going back in time a little bit here.
We are going way back in time, Joe. And what is really interesting here is that their new employee onboarding, if we can even call it that, for the 3 companies that were responsible for this transcontinental was very simple. It literally was hop on the local train, hop off at the end of the track, get a pick and a shovel, and good luck, we'll pick you up later, don't die.
Don't die. Okay. Strangely, that doesn't sound too dissimilar, apart from the don't die part, to a lot of our experiences today in 2021. You know, in our more modern jobs, we may not be worried about dying, but many of us have been given barely more guidance than that. And to be honest, I've had experiences where I turn up on the job and I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing.
No, exactly, Joe. And there is really a lot that can still be improved here for many companies because we've got a few quick stats to finish off our Did You Know section. Now, Did you know that up to 20% of employee turnover happens in the first 45 days and nearly 33% of new hires look for a new job within their first 6 months on the job.
Wow. So that's one fifth of employees turnover within the first 45 days.
Yes.
Crazy.
Yeah. And did you know that new hires who have had a great onboarding are 69% more likely to stay with the company for 3 years? So there you have a long-lasting relationship, don't you?
Yes.
At least the start of it. And did you know that organizations with a great employee onboarding program experience up to 54% greater new hire productivity?
Super interesting. That was our Did You Know segment. Now on to the next segment, which I personally love. It's called the Outsider Outpouring. 30 seconds from me, your HR outsider, to give an outsider's perspective on this topic of remote onboarding or onboarding. So start the clock. Here we go. Okay. So, you can definitely feel lost when you first start a job. And I have definitely had that experience a few times in my career, especially earlier in my career when I didn't really know what I was doing. But I think context is so important. And now as a manager of a few people, I think the why behind the tasks and explaining that in the onboarding process is so important, because a task is a task, but understanding why it's being done or what the why is behind it actually enables people to bring their own thinking, their own innovation to the table as well. And I think that's such a huge part of onboarding from my perspective anyway. So that's my Outsider Outpouring today. Context is so important, the why behind it, not just telling people what to do, but the why behind it.
Great rant there, Joe. And I agree, it is so important for people to know exactly what they are doing today, how it is helping the team and how it is helping the organization move forward.
Yes.
So important.
I think it's so crucial. Like they can actually, the big goal of adding a new team member is them being able to bring their sense of how to do things better as well.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Onto the myths now, Joe. So in this part of the episode, we debunk a few common myths about the topic. And today that will be all about onboarding. The first myth here is a proper onboarding process is a nice to have and not a necessity. That is incorrect.
So wrong.
Absolutely. Onboarding has a massive effect on your organization, both through company culture and financial impact. It is the direct indicator of whether your business will sink or swim, as it influences productivity, engagement, and it increases retention. Now, another myth here for you is that onboarding is just HR's job. Now, we've seen this in our employer branding episode as well. It was not just a task of HR, and this is a misconception we often hear about onboarding as well. It is not solely the responsibility of HR and the hiring manager. While they are absolutely critical to onboarding, they are not the whole story. Employee onboarding isn't just compliance, paperwork, and an orientation. It is a concerted, company-wide effort to welcome new employees and provide them with the tools, the information, and the network they need to be successful.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nelly. So third myth for today, and our final myth is this one. Onboarding begins on the first day of work. No, it doesn't. Don't say that. It's not true. It's tempting, though, to believe that an employee's onboarding experience doesn't begin until the employee is planted at their desk, either in the office or at home, on that very first day of work. However, it's simply not the case. So many articles actually agree, and HR professionals agree, that onboarding begins as soon as the job is accepted. Or perhaps we should call that pre-boarding, Nearly.
That is how we should call it, Joe, because that's actually the name that we give it. And pre-boarding is super important because especially in today's market, what happens if you do not engage with a candidate between the moment they signed and between their very first day, you might actually already have lost them.
Right.
Again, here, it's a bit like in a relationship, Joe, when you start dating someone and you had an amazing evening last night and then someone doesn't call you for 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
What happens?
It's bad. It's only going to be bad.
You move on, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, exactly. So what are some typical things that you could do during this pre-boarding period? Because there are heaps of them, Joe. So what you can do already, you can invite the new hire to some social events that you might be having with the team so that they start integrating with the team already. You can also invite them to industry events like trade shows if they're going to be happening again at some point so that they can really get themselves inquire so that they really
about
can
the topics
exactly
and
they can really get into the topic.
Industry.
Also, just send them a nice postcard. We actually hear companies do this quite often. A written postcard with the team saying how happy they are that the person is going to be joining. And of course, you can also make sure that you already send them some of the practical stuff so that on the day when they start, they know how they can get to the office, where they can get the access card and that kind of stuff. So there are heaps of things to do during the pre-boarding. But the most important thing is here to keep engaging with the new hire.
Yes, brilliant tips, Nearly. So that's a whole... it's part of onboarding, pre-boarding, but it's a topic unto itself, and it's something that needs to be thought of even before that first day, pre-boarding. So, Nearly, it's time for your insider actions, a step-by-step plan on this topic around remote onboarding, and I think today you've got 5 steps to talk us through, right?
The onboarding period starts as soon as a candidate signs the offer letter, and it ends when the employee is able to autonomously do the job they were hired to do. Now, there are various opinions as to the different stages of employee onboarding, and we would like to note here that an onboarding is different for every organization, often, of course, for every role and for every industry. So the examples that we will give in this section are mostly based on knowledge workers and knowledge workers who are working mostly remotely, because we said remote onboarding. All right, Joe, are you ready?
I am ready.
Fantastic. So we roughly distinguish 5 stages of employee onboarding. There is before the first day, the pre-boarding we talked about. There is on the first day, orientation. There's the first week, the first 90 days, and there's the end of the first year.
Amazing. Even all the way to the end of the first year.
Yeah, opinions differ as to that point as well, but after the first year can be a really good time to really wrap up that onboarding. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's start with the pre-boarding, Joe. What you can do, send your new hires already practical information, a few really cool welcome videos from the team, invite them to social events if there are any in this still a bit pandemic-y era, and draft a 90-day plan. That is important because it gives employees a really good overview of their responsibilities and the expectations that you have of them in terms of performance for their first 90 days at the company. Now, Joe, there are a few practicalities as well when it comes to pre-boarding. So some things to bear in mind here are, of course, making sure that the hardware is going to be up and running by the time that the new employee is going to start. If they are going to come to the office a bit now and then, assign them, of course, a desk area or not, if that's not your policy. Send them the user agreement for the equipment, office access card, welcome kit, and so on.
Yes, practical stuff, but so important.
Yes, and it goes wrong so often.
Yes. Like, there's nothing worse than sitting around on your first few days without a computer or without email.
Yeah, or waiting for 2 hours because software is updating.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. On the first day then, the second stage of the onboarding, this is the orientation. Now, whatever you're doing, make sure that you make that moment memorable and festive. So if you're not yet in an office setting, send cake, donuts, or champagne to the new hire and to everybody in the team so that you can do a virtual festive gathering and welcome that new team member. Then make sure that you discuss the agenda for the day, because this is a big day. And if we talk about first impressions, then first impressions are very important. And this will be one of the most important ones for your freshly hired employee. So discuss the agenda so that they know what they can expect. And of course, introduce their colleagues and the team to them. Now, some practicalities here as well, Joe. So think, of course, about the Wi-Fi password if people are going to come into the office, but also take a profile picture and submit info, for instance, for the payroll. We are going to go on to the first week, the third phase of the employee onboarding. First week, make sure again that you organize a really cool team event. So maybe you can have lunch all together online, but do something together with the team or play a game online. Anyhow, organize a team event. Then make sure you organize individual virtual sit-downs with direct colleagues so that really the new hire can get to know people a little bit better. And of course, have a one-on-one with the hiring manager. Super important to really gauge, like, okay, how was this first week? How are you feeling? Just touch base with them.
Totally. It seems like a lot of this is about those relationships. Building those relationships is so important.
Yeah. And some practicalities here. So, of course, introduce a new employee on LinkedIn and say that you're super happy with them as a company, add them to the company page. And also, this is something that I thought was quite cool. Plan on them giving a company pitch where they really pitch the company to the team, for instance, which is a really great way for them to think about the company, its strong suits, and give a presentation about it.
Cool idea.
All right, going on to the first 90 days show. So these are these first 3 months, and we saw it in episode 1, a lot of people already decide to leave within this period. So this is kind of an important milestone.
It is.
Now, discuss the 90-day plan. So this is the plan that you presented to the new hire on their very first day. And so here you really sit down with them and see, okay, how are things going in terms of responsibilities and key projects. Then we go to phase number 5. It's the end of the first year. Now, Joe, you said it, not everyone thinks that really onboarding should officially take that that long, but it can really be a good moment to sit down and see, okay, how's your first year been with the company? It can also be a good moment to have their first annual performance review. So you could actually maybe combine it. Now, in this meeting or sit down or whatever you want to call it, you check the practical side of things, although there should not be any issues anymore on that side. You also talk about the job-related side of things. How are your new employees performing? You also now really look at the future at the company. So you can start talking about your company's L&D program, ask them about their preferences and ambitions in this regard. And of course, you ask them what they thought of their onboarding in hindsight. You ask them if there was anything missing, if you could have done anything better, if they have some suggestions, so that you can always keep improving your employee onboarding.
Brilliant. Sounds like there's a real feedback element even to that last part, but all throughout really, hearing from the employee as well.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, that was our step-by-step plan, the insider actions. Now we're going to move on to our final segment of today. It's around a story or an example of a company doing this in a brilliant way, and it's a company you and I really love, Neely.
It is.
Yes, they're called Buffer. And so we were able actually to interview Nicole Miller, who's in the HR team there at Buffer in season 1 of the podcast. If you want to listen to that, it's really around their 4-day work week at Buffer, and it's a brilliant episode. So it's season 1, episode 14. Would encourage you to go back, listen to that if you haven't.
Absolutely. Have a listen.
Yes, but we want to tell you a little bit about this story, right?
So maybe you can start by talking about Buffer a little bit.
Yes. So Buffer essentially is a SaaS platform, a social media management platform. And they're actually, what's really interesting is they're a fully remote company. So they don't have any offices, and they're really innovative when it comes to HR practices. They actually have a blog where they talk all about it. So you can check that out as well.
Nice. And what did their onboarding used to be like, Joe?
Yes. So before they sort of revolutionized it, what they had for many years was what they called a 45-day boot camp for new hires. And essentially that was their sort of probationary period. So new hires came in as contractors, and Buffer didn't offer them sort of standard benefits or didn't include them in retreats and that sort of thing. Basically, long story short, this got to a point where, it all started and was designed with good intentions, but Buffer knew that they needed to change something because, it was a stressful time for new teammates who were kind of having, that probationary period is always stressful, but Buffer didn't want it to be like that. And so they did a bunch of things to change that. They overhauled it, and that's what we're going to get into now. So what did they do? So essentially, they really worked on centralizing the whole approach. So the people team really took it on themselves to centralize it, because a problem they were also seeing was that each new employee had a different experience of onboarding. They got different information. They didn't all get up to speed as quickly as each other. And so they pulled everything together, and they essentially figured out a list of items that they needed to run through to essentially put a strategy in place. So those included: what equipment will new hires need? How will they get it? Because they're all remote. How will new hires get the logins to necessary tools, practical things like that? How do we communicate our expectations? Where do we document all the shared cultural norms? And how, for example, does Buffer organize for new hires to arrange and join meetings on their first day? So just a bunch of things that they worked through to put together a really structured strategy around this.
Yeah, great example of the things that we mentioned in our tips today as well, Joe, how we see it here in practice at Buffer. I think Buffer also had a super cool way of going about the socialization aspect of new hires, don't they?
Yes. So I think I know what you're touching on, Neely. Really, what we wanted to focus in on in this episode is talking about a couple of things. So first of all is their buddy system. So it was really brilliant to read up a bit more about this. So right now what they've done and where they're at is that they've reworked the whole process so that each new hire focuses on 3 key people. So first of all, it's your hiring manager. That's pretty obvious. But then 2 buddies as well. So first of all, they have what's called a role buddy, and they have a culture buddy. So these 2 buddies really accompany you through your onboarding experience. One really around your role, obviously, the job that you're hired to do, but one around the culture and helping you to understand that and really experience that.
I love that, Joe, because we heard about buddy systems before, of course, but I'd never heard before about having a culture buddy and a role buddy. And I think especially in a remote environment, this is so great to have.
Yes. And one final thing I want to touch on about this Buffer example is that feedback really goes both ways. So we touched on it before in your step-by-step plan, Neely, is that Buffer have really framed this whole process around not only giving feedback to the employee, but also receiving it at specific times and all throughout that process. So they set up a process with 30, 60, and 90 days and really taking time to hear from the employee about their feedback. They really see this concept of the beginner's mind as so crucial. So the sense that someone coming from the exterior sees things differently, can bring a different perspective, and they see that as really, really valuable. So they've built that into the whole process. So just a fantastic example of everything we've been talking about in remote onboarding.
Yes, the beginner's mind as well. That is such a great thing to keep in mind here.
Yes, and there's so much to be gained from new people coming in with new perspectives, new innovation, different ways of doing things.
Really enrich into your onboarding process, I think, over time.
For sure.
Awesome, Joe. Thanks so much for sharing that one. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We will be back next week with a new episode in our Fundamentals series. So stay tuned and see you next time.
Yes, see ya.
Bye.